Dr. Rafał Kuś has an undergraduate experience in law and journalism as well as social communication at, you're going to have to help me out with university, but I'm going to go with it, the Jagiellonian?
Jagiellonian.
That's pretty close, university in Poland. Also has several postgraduate studies in the fields of law, press, and rhetoric, to name a few areas of his expertise. It led to him getting his PhD in an interdisciplinary program at that same university, including a thesis paper, which has a lot of relevance to what he's about to talk to tonight, which was on the public broadcasting service and the role of public television in the U.S. media system, which won the best doctoral dissertation in the field of electronic media in 2012. He's been an academic teacher at various university programs since 2006, and is currently a visiting professor. Is that the status at Utica College?
Yes.
Visiting professor at Utica College. So please welcome and give your attention to Dr. Rafał Kuś.
Thank you so much. My name is Rafał Kuś. I work at the Institute of American Studies and Polish Diaspora at the Jagiellonian University in Kraków. Thank you so much. And I would like to say a few words about the relationship between media and politics. I would like to say a few things about how media shape our political realities and how the development in media technology causes some changes in recent years to the way political processes, political mechanisms work. But let's start from the very beginning. If we consider the relationship between media and politics, we must consider various interactions between those two spheres of public life. And those can take many shapes in different political regimes, in different political systems. In authoritarian regimes, the relationship is pretty much straightforward. Usually the media are used by the government as a transmission belt to just spread their message to the public, to spread the ideas, the programs, the slogans of the ruling party to the whole society. And so this is the simpler version. On the other hand, in democratic regimes, this relationship might be a bit more complicated, a bit more complex. On the one hand, media are able to control the government. And for example, in the United States, you have seen many examples of media performing the duties of the so-called force branch of power. They can control the government, they can find out things that the government would like to hide from the public and change and cause a change in policy, cause a change in personnel in government institutions. On the other hand, in democratic regimes, also, just like media control the government, also media can be used by politicians, can be used by government to achieve their goals. And this can happen this can happen in many ways. The media are the primary means also in democratic regimes, in democratic systems, to spread the message from the politicians to the public, to try in a way to persuade, suggest some solutions to problems, to familiarize the public with the ideas of, on the one hand, the government, on the other, of opposition parties. And of course, this situation of this twofold, of this two-way interaction between the government, media and the world of politics, here depicted is the ideal situation which can happen in a democratic regime. But of course, in various countries of the world, we can find some examples of situations that are not that clear-cut. For example, we can find some regimes that in name or well, in the majority of aspects are democratic, but they also have some peculiarities. For example, in case of Italy under the government of Silvio Berlusconi, for example, in the case of the Russian Federation, for example, in the case of Poland nowadays, we can see that the government, that the ruling party, governing party, has something more to say about how media work, how they depict the reality, how they depict the world, than in some other countries, for example, the US. Okay, now, when it comes to political communication, when it comes to the ways that media can be used by the politician, we can distinguish between three main types of communication. And these are political campaigning, use of news, so putting a spin on some current affairs, and the third thing is political advertising. So political commercials that could be bought, that could be distributed among the audience for some political gains. And let's focus very briefly on those three types of political communication. One more thing, I should have started from this. I would like just to say a few things about the basic concept of the relationship between media and politics, just to start a discussion. So this will be very brief, and hopefully I will be able not to bore you to death. All right. So first of all, we have political campaigning. You might recognize those two guys. The one on the left is Lech Wałęsa, the leader of Solidarity, the former president of Poland. The other is Aleksander Kwaśniewski, another of Polish presidents of the last couple of years. And political campaigning actually takes sometimes too much credit than it should. Political campaigns are a very good subject of study, of research, as they are limited in time. They can be quite easily researched, quite easily studied, and in fact, this tradition of putting a special emphasis on political campaigning can be traced back to Paul Lazarsfeld, to his study about the American presidential election in 1940, and numerous such studies have been conducted in subsequent years. The problem with political campaigning using media in order to influence the society during the campaign is that most of the time it does not work. And the gains that are there to be taken are usually not that huge as it is commonly thought. In fact, it can be said that well, of course, there are some examples of political campaigns that might have really changed the outcome of the election. You know, when it comes to American political system, then of course the famous debate between Nixon and Kennedy in 1960 comes to mind as an example of such an event. But we must remember that in this case the election was extremely close. So this was a special example. And usually political campaigning does not bring some immediate outcomes, some immediate results, due to the fact that our political beliefs are usually something that we hold very dear, that it's something very crucial to our opinions about the world as such. Also, the time limit of the campaigning is always somehow restrained. Also, the messages that we get, that the society gets during a campaign usually come from different sources. So there is one message persuading us to vote for one guy, another for another, and so those messages can balance, somehow counter one another. Another thing is the use of news. So putting a spin on current events in order to persuade the audience to some political viewpoint, and this is actually quite effective. Of course, if used in a consequent manner. For example, well, in fact, virtually every political party in Poland tries to have the so-called message of the day. So that communication, political communication, is somehow coordinated at the central level. So that the message that gets to the audience, the message that gets to the potential voters is clear, is coherent with what other politicians of the same party say, and so on. And of course, this is possible if we are able, if our party, if our political circle has the power to somehow influence the media, to say, to present different situations in the light that we want them to be presented. And this is very often the case with Polish public media, as we shall see in a moment. That's an American example, but I just love this very photo. This is of course Michael Dukakis in his notorious photo session in a tank that was taken during the campaign of 1988. Although Michael Dukakis had a distinguished career as a soldier, as a military man, this attempt at political communication backfired at him and caused all sorts of ridicule go his way. And that's the problem with political advertising, with political commercials. They can be used, one more thing, they can be used both during campaigns or outside of campaigning. And the problem with those are that, well, people, the audience is usually conditioned to, well, not to believe commercials, advertising that much. So we always think that maybe this is not as trustworthy as the sender of the message would want us to believe. Also, the other thing is that, well, as in the case of Michael Dukakis, sometimes those types of messages tend to backfire. There is, in media studies, we have a concept of the boomerang effect. So you throw a boomerang and then it goes your way, hitting your head. And this happens, you know, also even with very well-intentioned, very well-rehearsed, very well-prepared campaigns, because, well, creating a successful political campaign is a very complex task, and there is quite a lot of things that just can go wrong. For example, this very idea of Michael Dukakis in a tank, well, has been done before with much better results. Well, apparently something did not work in this case. All right. Now, what are these were the main ways, main types of political communication. Now, a few things about the effects of media as such on political processes, on political mechanisms. There are several of those, and usually they are not positive. First of all, we have the concept of the video malaise. Malaise, as in the French word for general unhealthiness. This video malaise is a phenomenon that causes people who are well, addicted to electronic media to lose interest in well, social life around them. To get focused on entertainment, those heavy viewers tend to focus on some activities that are not done in a social environment. There was a book, an essay, and then a book by an American scholar, Robert Putnam, who wrote this book, Bowling Alone, about, you have probably heard about it. This is about how the American society got a bit, you know, disjointed, got fragmentarized in a sense. And Putnam was writing about how a few years ago many Americans participated in bowling clubs. In some bowling leagues and so on. And nowadays, even more Americans are participating in those activities, but they don't compete against one another anymore. They do it just with a couple of friends, and this does not have the social aspect it used to. So that's one thing. Another thing is the negative effect of political communication in the media on voter trust and goodwill. All the cynicism, all the negativity of commercials, of political commercials, tend to cause an image of politics as something dirty, as something immoral, as something that a moral human being shouldn't be a part of. And of course, this can lead to lower turnout during the elections. More and more people taking a passive stance towards politics as such. Then we have another effect of media functioning in the political system, the increased dependence on media channels and gatekeepers, so that the phenomenon of mediatization, the phenomenon of how politics is a game nowadays, is a game played in the arena that was created by media. Political parties, political candidates, to a large degree lost their traditional direct ways of contacting, spreading their message, contacting people. In fact, or virtually every act of political communication nowadays has to be has to be sent through the media. And this is something that has been already observed several decades ago. There was a study of the Watergate affair, the Watergate scandal, in which it was stated that during the Watergate proceedings, every action of the main actors, of the main players, so on the one hand, President Nixon and his entourage, his environment, his circle, and also the independent prosecutor, every action of those two actors were directed not only at one another, but first and foremost towards the media, as both sides knew that the media hold the key to the solution to this whole problem. As Nixon, in order to stay in office, had to gain again the trust of the people, and the prosecutor had to show the people that he is not morally competent to still hold his office. Another thing, and this is a very, I would say, serious problem. A serious problem that is caused by the way media, especially electronic media, which use sound bites, some very short summaries for complex issues. That is framing elections as horse races. For example, my PhD was about, as it was said, about the public broadcasting service. And as a part of my PhD, I attempted to compare the media coverage, news coverage of PBS NewsHour on the one hand, and the three major evening news shows in the US. That is NBC Nightly News, CBS Evening News, and ABC World News. And the problem with the commercial news shows was that the first thing was that they were shorter than the public broadcasting service news show, and also they tended to present, as I said, some very complex issues in some stories that lasted, 2 or 3 minutes, and sometimes you really cannot present a complex issue in a meaningful way with this time limitation. In fact, this caused a situation in which the people, the media audience, were not served well by the news, that they did not get all the information they needed to make an informed decision, for example, political decision. And sometimes also, during campaigns, and there are various media studies that deal with this problem, the campaigns are presented, for example, especially presidential campaigns, focus not on the programs, not on the platforms of the candidates, but on just on the dynamics of the race. So every day in the news, during the campaign, we can hear not about something that a given candidate is planning to do when he gets elected. And these are the things that are needed for us, for the voters, in order to make an informed decision, a rational decision. But the media usually focus on whether a candidate lost or gained some 2% in polls. So this creates a situation in which, it's easy to take sides, it's easy to support a candidate as if it was a sports team or this horse from this metaphor. But this is not a situation in which we have the necessary information to reflect on what is really going on. Another important important in the context of this talk, as it deals with international relations mainly, effect of media functioning is the CNN effect. You probably have heard about this effect. CNN effect is an effect of media functioning that was first observed when CNN appeared on the media landscape, on the media scene in the early 80s. CNN was the first 24/7 news channel, and it really changed the dynamics of policy making in the US. It was first described, of course, American media studies are the best in the world, so it was first described in case of the US, and it changed the dynamics in this sense that politics began to be a game played in real time. When the CNN channel informed people of what was going on all around the world, the US government, under pressure of CNN viewers, who were at the same time potential voters, had to make decisions, had to do some action immediately. There was no time till the next edition of a newspaper, till the next edition of an evening news show. Everything had to be done more quickly. Also, some of the issues that were presented on electronic media, on such channels, were easier to sell to the public. For example, if we had some dramatic images of some explosion, of some natural disaster, those images of course sell better, and their agenda setting potential is of course higher. Okay, now as far as the relationship between media and war is connected, it can be said that mass media are necessary nowadays. The support, the organized way of using the media, the mass media, is quite necessary for effective handling of any military conflict. And this is due to the fact that in democracies, usually media can reach everyone in the society, electronic media can reach everyone in the society, and they are usually regarded as more or less but trustworthy. And if we don't have, in case of media coverage of wars, if the government is not able to use media effectively, just like it was the case with the Vietnam War in the 60s and 70s, there is a real danger that people will eventually start to get disillusioned and stop supporting the government in its activities. In order to combat this situation, contemporary governments became very, very effective in using media to their advantage in such situations. And this can be said not only about the American government, but governments of many politically active, internationally active countries all over the world. For example, the Russian Federation government. And while writing my PhD, I found a very nice concept in one of the books by David Barsamian. I don't know if you're familiar with this. This is an American journalist and activist. He said that American media nowadays are sick with an illness he called we-itis. We-itis, you can get the meaning of this word. We-itis in that media present the actions of American military as in the first person, that we conquered something, we were defeated, or we were victorious, creating a sense of connection between the action of the military, which can be controversial, Barsamian suggests, and the whole public. So, no matter if those actions are regarded as for example, morally good or wrong, this is still it is still we that are doing those things, and also this can be effectively done. As this time the British media scholar Dennis McQuaid suggests, by monopolizing sources of information. So, for example, if we put our war correspondents in the camps of military, the idea is that they will get the the optics, that they will get the viewpoint of those guys they are staying with. And basically it can be said that this is done for the security, for the safety of journalists. But of course this can be also regarded as a way of shaping coverage of a given conflict. All right, now another use of media, of course, if we have a good, sure grasp of the media, and we can use them to our advantage in an organized, in a coherent way, is to use media as an instrument, as a tool of soft power. You have probably familiar with the concept, and soft power refers to a situation in which a country may obtain its goals because other countries want to follow it, admire its values, emulate its example, aspire to its level of prosperity, and so on. So this is gaining our goals in the global arena, not by force, not by using military, but by example, but by creating our image as a attractive image for other countries to follow. And of course, it could be argued that the world champion in creating soft power and positive image is the United States of America. Such events as the moon landing. I have a great course at the Jagiellonian University. It's called the American Space Program, and it attracts quite a lot of students every year. This can be seen as the ultimate PR stunt, creating a positive image for the whole nation for not only years or decades, but perhaps centuries to come. Rock music, Hollywood, Well, this is an example from my PhD. There is a great book called The PBS Companion by James Stewart, I suppose, and he wrote there that even with the whole glamour, with the whole splendor of Hollywood, rock music, and things like this, perhaps it is Sesame Street that is the greatest ambassador of American culture to people all over the world. And well, I would agree. Kids in Poland love Sesame Street as much as American kids, I would assume. And of course, the very idea of liberty central to America as a nation, as a country, as a great experiment is also something very attractive, something that people from all over the world can be fond of. But of course, if we use soft power to achieve our goals, we must make it certain that our actions are seen as honest, as credible, because there is nothing worse than present ourselves as someone manipulative who wants to achieve some goals, but not really. These goals are not really for the good of the whole world community, but for our own. And in fact, there are several cases of some PR stunts that were conceived and executed by a given nation, which tended to backfire. For example, there is in Poland nowadays, historical policy is the word of the day. It's something that quite a lot of political discussions have as its subject. Recently, one of the advisors to our president suggested that Poland should create something that he called Mabena. Mabena means this is an abbreviation, a sort of acronym from the words machine of narrative security. And the point of this concept, because that's a concept, that's not an institution, not a mechanism, whatever, just a concept, is to create some narrations in order to put Poland in a good position when it comes to her image in the world. But of course, I would say, that's my opinion, any historical policy must always, the only historical policy that it is worth executing is the historical policy based on truth. So for me personally, I would say that those kinds of concepts, those kinds of mechanisms are not really necessary, because if you stand by the truth, then everything should be fine. For example, there are some cases in other countries all over the world. The first case that comes to my mind would be the government of Turkey and the question of the Armenian genocide. You are familiar with this event, perhaps. No one can deny that this atrocity, that this act of genocide really happened. And I think that the government of Turkey, wanting to keep its image as the country that was not involved in this kind of thing, is actually achieving the opposite result, because this shows the country as a country that is not comfortable with its own past. I would say that this is counterproductive for the whole thing they are trying to achieve this way. Okay, now a few words about the Polish media system and whether the Polish media can be used for such an organized action, can be used in an organized, systematic way to achieve the goals of the government. As far as media systems in the world are concerned, there have been historically quite a few classifications of media systems. There is a famous classification that was included in the also famous book, The Four Theories of the Press, written by Wilbur Schramm and some of his colleagues back in the 1950s. And then we had some models such as authoritarian media system, communist, well, these were the 50s, authoritarian, communist, libertarian, and social responsibility. The last one was supposed to be the best. But of course, in recent times, in the last couple of decades after the fall of communism, this whole classification championed by Schramm, well, ceased to be relevant anymore. And currently, the majority of media scholars, when comparing different media systems, focus on another classification. This is a classification that was created by a duo of American and Italian media scholars, Daniel Hallin and Paolo Mancini, who distinguish between three main types of media systems. Of course, they are some ideal models, and you cannot find them in real life. But these are some ideals to which some individual real-life media systems can be compared. And these are the Mediterranean, North Central European, and North Atlantic media systems. And the Mediterranean media system is a media system in which electronic media are the most important. Printed press does not get that much circulation. Also, Mediterranean model found in the countries around the basin of the Mediterranean Sea can be described as a model in which media are very often just instruments for the politicians, tools for the politician. The professionalization of the journalistic profession is not that high due to lack of strong trade organizations, ethical codes, poorer than in other countries, educational arrangements, and so on. So that's the Mediterranean model. The North or Central European, that is prevalent in such countries as Germany, the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Holland, the Netherlands, and so on, is a model based on, it has some distinguishing characteristics in that it has high circulation numbers. High circulation numbers of printed press. It has also a high level of state intervention into the media system, but all the press freedoms are guaranteed by law. Also, just like in case of Mediterranean system, there is a strong phenomenon of the so-called political parallelism, and this is a situation in which the divisions that are present in the political system are mirrored also in the media system. So, for example, we have television channels which are conservative and those that are liberal. Or we have, I don't know, weeklies, conservative, socialist, whatnot, just like the parties in this political system. And then we have the North Atlantic system, or liberal system, of which the most typical individual system would be, of course, the American system, but also British, Irish, Canadian, and so on. So here we have low political parallelism, but it does change. It has changed in the last couple of years. We have high professionalization. We have also press that is usually commercial in nature. That historically was not used as a bullhorn for any party, but well, just try to sell as many copies of as it could. When we look at, for example, the history of American popular press and European popular press, we can see that in the U.S. All the largest titles with the highest circulation were just popular commercial titles that were trying to get to the largest possible audience, while in Europe, in many cases, the most important papers had a very radical, a very well defined political stance, political position. Now, which of those models can describe the Polish media system the best? Some people say that the Polish media are an example of the Mediterranean system, and that the Polish media actually resemble, the world of Polish media actually resembles the Italian model. So this would make Poland a Mediterranean country, but without the beautiful beaches, great weather, and all the good things associated with the Mediterranean region. And there's some truth to it. Poland has only recently become a democratic country. The economy is still weak. Well, in fact, it's doing great for the last couple of years. But of course, this is still not the level of Germany or some other Western European countries. The national legal authority is quite weak. The rule of law is sometimes, unfortunately, violated in Poland, and the state tends to have a strong influence on the media system. When the Polish, because in Poland we have a dual media system. Dual media system in that we have, when it comes to electronic media, in that we have public radio and public television, and also private networks, both radio and television networks. And the problem about Polish public media is that when they were created in 1994, when the communist state-run media institutions were reorganized as public institutions, they have been always treated by politicians as the prize for the winner in national elections. So virtually for some 24 years, since 1994, it has always been the case that when a party was victorious in elections, the first thing they did was to make a purge in the authorities, in the authorities of public media, and put their own people there, and it happened every single time. The problem is that this process has escalated in the last couple of years, and in the last 3 years, it can be argued that the Polish public media has become, well, just a tool for the governing party, as it is extremely biased in its messages, in its political commentary. There is a lot of truth in this opinion that Polish media is Italianized as such, but to be precise, it can be described as a sort of hybrid between the polarized pluralist or Mediterranean and liberal or North Atlantic system. We have such features of our media system as small circulation of daily newspapers, central position of electronic media, radio, television, nowadays also internet, which has become the primary political medium in Poland for the last couple of years. Strong focus on politics, external pluralism, that is, you find pluralism only when you look at the whole media system. If you take, for example, an individual weekly newspaper, you will see only conservative or only liberal authors in it. There is no pluralism within a given magazine. The journalist is not oriented towards information but commentary. Instrumentalization of media, we have already discussed it. Lower professionalization of the professional journalists. Conflicts over autonomy and state ownership of public radio and television. Still, we have some liberal features in our system as well, which makes our system go to the direction of American or British or Canadian and so on. The media system is more and more dominated by private entities. There is quite a lot of competition, tabloidization, that is, media that are sensational in nature, that are not offering an in-depth reporting or commentary, but just some flash information and some celebrity gossip are usually the media that sell the best in our country. All right. So this creates. If we take this all into consideration, especially the fact that the government enjoys a high level of control over Polish electronic media, it can be said that, that the government can do quite a lot when it comes to controlling the image of a country. So, in a way, contributing to the soft power assets of the country. Still, it has to be done in a rational, organized, and clever way, so that the case of Turkey and the Armenian genocide won't be repeated. Okay, now something for the ending part of my presentation, something about new media. New media and the emergence of the phenomena associated with new media as means of political communication. First of all, I would like to quote just to introduce you to the topic of characteristics of new media. I would like to say a few words about the classification of the features of new media that I've taken from the works of a Russian-American media scholar, Lev Manovich. This scholar said that new media are characterized by the 5 distinguishing factors and traits, let's say. First of all, digital representation. This is pretty much obvious. Every object of the new media can be described as some zeros and ones. That's pretty much obvious. This can be said about every object of new media, be it a GIF image, a MP3 file, a video game, a website, whatnot. Then you have modularity, in that every object of new media can be described as an object composed of other discrete objects. So, for example, if you have a website, you have some text, you have some embedded pictures, videos, you have some JavaScripts, and so on. If you take a video game, then you have those individual assets. You put, an asset of a tree, an island, some water, and you have Far Cry 3 or some other computer game. Now, there is another feature, automatization. Automatization, which means that new media can be created, objects of new media can be created, can be distributed, can be received and read or experienced in an automized fashion. And this, of course, creates a perfect situation for every user of new media to become the creator of new media. For example, a few decades ago, if you wanted to have your own website, to put your photos from the holidays, some cat pictures and other things you would want to put online, then you had to know HTML, know JavaScript, know how to do it. Now you just register on Facebook or on some blogging platform, and you have everything. You don't need any rocket science. You don't need any specialist knowledge in order to be an author, in order to be, for example, a political commentator. So the barrier, the bar that you have to jump over to become an author, to become a creator, is actually very low. And when you look, for example, at the media market before the advent, before the emergence of new media, if you wanted, for example, to have a TV station, you would have to be very rich. You would have to have some technical knowledge how to do it. You would have to get a license from the FCC. You would have to have some competent personnel in order for the whole thing to function. And now you can just log on to the blogging platform of your choice, and you can become the moral authority in your society by commenting events of the political scene. That's another thing. Then variability. An object of the traditional old media is always the same. If we have, for example, a copy of a newspaper, it should be exactly the same as every other copy of the same newspaper, excluding some, printing errors or whatnot. The same goes to, for example, radio and television broadcasts. Everyone who is listening to a radio show of some, journalist gets the same experience. And in case of new media, this can change. We can get, for example, we get the advertisements on the website we use, which are based to for example, to the things we put in Google or to our browsing patterns and so on. And in fact, we can customize the object of new media to our tastes in whatever fashion. And then the last thing is transcoding. That is the use of traditional media formats in new digital environment. So, for example, when you take Facebook, you have the traditional forms traditional cultural forms of a photo album, or a diary, or a letter, because we have Messenger, we can communicate with one another. So these are the traditional media formats, but transformed into this new digital reality. Now, how new media are used in political communication. First of all, let me say that in Poland, internet became, in the last couple of years, the primary political medium. Television is not anymore that important. Radio also not as much important as the internet. Newspapers also are a thing of the past. And basically, the majority of Polish people take their news from the internet, especially from social media websites, such as Facebook, such as Twitter, also from different news websites. We have quite a lot of those in Poland. Also, the websites of traditional media, of traditional papers, or radio or television stations. And this, of course, caused a situation in which fake news, so some pieces of information which do not mirror the reality, which are created in order to deform the reality, in order to deceive, can be very easily spread among the audience, among the internet users in Poland. And we have seen quite a lot of this thing in the last couple of years in Poland. In fact, it can be said that when Trump won the presidential election in 2016, this was a major surprise for many people in America and also all around the world. But in case of Polish observers of the American political system, and believe me that Poles care very much about what is going on in the US, that was just an example of a déjà vu situation. Because we had our own presidential election in 2015, and the situation was exactly the same. One of the candidates was pretty much sure to win. And now, suddenly, out of nowhere, another candidate appeared and grabbed the presidency in the last moment. And in both cases, those situations, in both cases, those elections, were full of organized initiatives, fake news initiatives in the internet, creating some political memes, creating some totally fake articles about different issues that was spread, spread like a fire on the prairie, as James Day wrote about about television in the US. In fact, just watching the Polish internet scene, Polish internet landscape, we can see many techniques we could have seen in the last couple of years. Many techniques that are also used nowadays in the US, everywhere, virtually in the world. So, for example, it is very often, for example, me and my friends don't really read comments on the articles anymore on some websites, as usually if you read those comments, they are usually quite vulgar, full of curse words and so on. But the point is that very often these are the same messages, just copied and pasted by different people on different websites. What else? For example, on Facebook, there are some, on Polish Facebook, there are some very, very active commentators. Guys who apparently spent their whole time just participating in some internet discussions. And if you look at their profiles, these are quite strange. The photos, profile photos, are obviously fake. They, instead of every normal human being puts some photos of cats on Facebook or some holiday photos, but they care only about politics, and they put the same messages over and over again. And in fact, on several times, some news about the troll farms, the troll farming, so that some systematic efforts to create such fake accounts were discussed in Polish press. Now, is this a sign of things to come? Is this something that we have just accept as the reality now in this new digital brave new world? It can be argued that this new phenomenon of fake news could be understood as a situation in which something has changed in the media environment around us. Because for the best part of the 20th century, the predominant model was the model of the traditional mass media. So we have a television station, and we have a lot of viewers receiving the same signal, or in the case of radio, or in the case of traditional newspapers. And this created a situation in which people, well, in fact, had to some extent, follow the authority of those broadcasters, of those media. This created a situation in which, of course, some of those media could be also deceiving to their audience, could also lie, but it was a model of, adhering to the message. Sticking to the message you thought was the most trustworthy, was the most credible. And now, in this new, extremely rich in different messages, digital environment, those traditional ways of, finding our way through this whole labyrinth of information, suddenly became much harder, much more difficult. So perhaps it can be argued that what happens now is a situation in which the society collectively is confused by the fact that it cannot use its old algorithm. It cannot use its old ways of finding their way. And well, it has to be, perhaps it remains to be seen whether we will be able in the next couple of years, in the next couple of decades maybe even, to find some effective new ways of coping with this digital rich environment we are going to live in the next couple of perhaps in the near future. Now, this is well, for the time being, for now at least, this can be regarded as a period of confusion, as a period of something new which has not been mastered by the population, by the people, and of course it can be, as a new thing, it can be exploited by those fake news merchants, by those institutions or entities that would like to manipulate the public opinion. And with this, I would like to end my presentation. I'll be more than happy for any questions you would have, any comments of what I have said. Yeah, please.
Now, you implied it, but you never really mentioned talking heads.
Yeah.
Where you had the CNN, I think there should be a comma there, talking heads.
Yeah.
Because they are a very powerful influence on the radio dial, the AM radio dial.
Yes.
And fake news. And I was kind of surprised. I've got a couple friends who were fairly intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
They actually listened to these talking heads and believed them. And I said to one of them, I said, Frank, I can't believe you're saying this. Oh yeah, he's right on after such and such. You gotta listen. And so, what are we to do? I mean, they're out there, they've got airtime, and they sound believable. And everybody says, oh, geez, I didn't know that. I didn't know this.
Well, this just shows that the old media environment, the media environment in which you had the traditional broadcasters employing such talking head authorities to the public. Talking head, yeah.
They're not authorities. They think they are. They're not really.
Well, but for their supporters, for their listeners, they.
Well, for the listeners.
They're perceived as such.
Yeah. So this just shows that also the old system, without the fake news, without the thousands of individual sources of information, well, could have its own mechanisms that could deceive people.
Do you have them in Poland?
Well, of course.
Talking heads?
Of course we do all the time, and in fact, there are some talking heads that seem to be even more powerful than American commentators. American, those radio personalities that are so popular among American audience. It can be said in Poland we have. There is a religious radio station around which a whole media empire has been built, and the leader of this whole enterprise, a Catholic priest, he has the status now of a kingmaker in Polish politics, because
He's a Catholic priest?
yes, he's a Catholic priest who built a media empire out of a single radio station. Now they have a radio network, a television network, a newspaper, a daily newspaper, and even a college of higher education. And he's so influential to the group of his listeners, viewers, readers, that he's forced to be reckoned with in Polish politics. So, that's probably a very similar situation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You wanted to ask?
I was going to ask a question regarding the phenomenon of fake news. And with all due respect here, I just wondered if this is where our president has picked this up, fake news. He always says, when he gives a talk and afterwards he says, this is fake news.
Yeah.
Our media here, he calls everyone fake news.
You mean President Trump?
Yeah. Well, I guess. Our president of the United States.
Of course.
Yes, yes, our president.
Yeah. Excuse me, and what was the question, or was that the comment?
Well, I just wondered if this is where he picked this up from a Polish point of view to call, all of our media reporters fake news.
Not really. I just, I was just saying that we had, some examples of the same phenomenon you have here. Of course, Trump got his fake news
Ideology.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Seems like a lot of the examples of countries that are integrating more and more digital media, the examples I've heard at least, and the examples you gave, have led to the rise of right-wing parties in those countries, and perhaps even gearing towards authoritarian regimes. Are there examples of implementations of this that have led to further democratization, and could be seen as examples of legislative that?
To tell you the truth, I don't think that this is very likely, because those fake news, those comments, those messages usually present a very simplified picture of reality. A picture of reality that is based on some black-white comparisons. A picture of reality that is probably does not they are not interested that much in the real dynamics, in the real details of what is going on in the world. But on the other hand, there is action and there is reaction. There are fake news, and we can see in Poland and in other countries as well, of course. But I'm focusing on Polish examples. We can see quite a lot of new websites or Facebook pages, fan pages that are whose goal is to debunk some of the information, obviously fake information, that was put on other websites, on other fan pages in the internet. And I think that this is something that should be praised. In Poland we have a system in which you have to write several dissertations along your educational way. So Bachelor of Arts, Master of Arts, PhD PhD and so on. And I remember my Bachelor of Arts dissertation, the first I have written several years ago, was about the right-wing propaganda in the internet. And I remember that in the conclusion of this paper, I wrote, and I think it's still true that you cannot really fight with some hateful propaganda using similar propaganda with a different vector, with a different spin. But probably the only way is to show in which details those fake news are not truthful, are presented a distorted vision of reality. So this would make such websites, such fan pages, something working towards the goal you mentioned, to further democratize the world. Because you cannot take a rational decision if you don't have all the facts, if you don't have all the information. And well, unfortunately, and this was quite visible in Poland in the last couple of years, there were, for example, some internet memes, for example, regarding the refugee crisis, which were well, obviously fabricated. But nevertheless, I've seen people, copying them, sharing them all over the internet, all over the Facebook. So perhaps the only way to do what you said would be to try to find out whether these are true or not. Of course, this is not an easy task, and probably the clickability and the sharing numbers could be lower than in case of the most successful fake news memes. Thank you so much.
What popped in my mind as you were speaking is that maybe we need to have a consumer report on the best news on the internet. In other words, start something to point out why different ones are.
I really changed too fast.
Is there such a possibility?
Well, maybe, but we have to have a set of criteria. First, we would have to, all agree what those criteria would be. So perhaps it's I don't know who would do it.
Well, I
To
see
some
it has
extent,
to
that's
start
what we've already
somewhere.
done with stations and networks that are for each party. They've kind of done it independent of each other.
Yeah, a little
And
bit,
people live
but
in that
still,
way
it seems
now.
like
The internet evolves too fast for it to really happen, because every day there's a new site, a new Facebook group,
Yeah.
something going to some fashion. So it would be impossible to actually keep up, because as soon as you get it into a category, there's something else popping up into an opposite category. And
it
it's
seems
only
like
going to
a
evolve
no-win
faster
ever
as time goes.
situation.
That's what I was going to say, essentially. As soon as you get an idea out there, before you can contradict it and prove that it is wrong, a new one has come out that has taken over from the old one. And it's happening in such a rapid cycle now that you don't get a chance to explain or debunk a previous misstatement or fake news.
Yes, but maybe if we manage to debunk one of the earliest statements, then at least some of those who shared this news before would just think twice before sharing a similar thing.
It would be nice if that happened, but
Yeah.
that isn't happening enough.
Yes.
Take one more question, we're running a little bit late. So.
In your professional opinion, as
Yes.
far as new media is concerned, where do you think we are heading? What's the end game? Will we learn from everything that's happening with all the fake news and the bar being set lower? Is there an end game? Are we going to get better as a society as far as media is concerned? what do you think? What is your professional opinion
Well,
about
I
where we're
would say
heading?
that there is no end game, because this is a case of the constant technological evolution, and now we have internet, now we have fake news, and we are still trying to cope with this new environment with a multitude of signals all going our way, and perhaps in a few years, in even few decades, we will be able to, as a society, to come up with some ways of cognitive ways of filtering learning how to find our way in this new labyrinth of media. But as soon as this can be achieved, there will be another technological revolution, and the whole cycle starts again. So I would say that this is something that really does not ever end.
Do you think it'll make us better, or do you think it'll make us worse as people?
Well, I'm generally optimist, but that's a principle. But there is no point in being a pessimist, is there? Thank you so much.
One more question in the back.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you so much.
One more question?
Yes, one more question, sorry. I was about 16 years old when I came to the conclusion that media is a true weapon of mass destruction. Because I survived the war in Bosnia,
I see.
Now, in your professional opinion, do you think that certain journalists, especially those that come from Balkans and Rwanda, should be prosecuted for war crimes, for spreading fake news that actually initiated the war crimes and genocide?
Well, I would say so. Especially in the case you mentioned Rwanda, there have been quite a lot of those hate-spreading radio stations. There was this radio, the Mil Colin, something like this, the radio of the Thousand Hills, which was especially well, it was accused of actually inciting the terror, the genocide, the killings. So yes, I would think that those they should be prosecuted.
Were they not? I thought they were. I thought they were brought to the ICC and some of them were brought up on war crimes.
Yes,
not?
yes.
Yeah, in case of Bosnia, there was a lot of discussion, but it seems to me that the International Tribunal for War Crimes doesn't know what to do. Because they'll say like, hey, he was not carrying a gun, but he was carrying a camera, which is in some cases more powerful than the gun itself.
Of course. Well, I would agree with this, to be sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.